Hello and welcome back. You're watching the Early Rundown. Now, it's not just the United Kingdom that is experiencing a cost of living crisis. The US is to reveal its latest inflation data later on today. Well, joining me from New York is Nina Trentman from the Wall Street Journal. Nina, good evening to you, I imagine. Thanks for being with us here on the Early Rundown. Now, there are concerns among economists that they might not have the tools able to control inflation. Is that a real concern, do you think?
That they do or they don't have the tools?
Sorry, they don't have the relevant tools, the adequate tools necessary.
Yeah, well, I think that remains to be seen, given that the Fed last week moved to increase interest rates in the US by 50 basis points, and they've been saying they would likely do the same again in June as well as in July, and could even consider a 75 basis point hike later this year. So I think in terms of tools, there is still a lot that the Federal Reserve can do to raise interest rates and therefore try to tamp down inflation. But of course, there's also various factors at play that aren't really in the control of the Fed, like, for example, the supply chain situation in China, where we've seen Shanghai and other cities in lockdown for several weeks now, which is impacting exports out of China, which is clogging up ports. And then also there's the war in Ukraine, which continues and which is impacting energy prices, which is driving sanctions policies by a number of countries. And therefore, there's also a lot of things at play here that aren't necessarily just impacted by US monetary policy.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of exactly my point, that the point we find ourselves at in history now is feels kind of unique. I mean, I know we've had these situations before with energy strictures and various other wars, of course, but we find ourselves perhaps at a point where all these things are coming at one time, and maybe the tools that we're using aren't adequate to deal with the job that they need to.
Well, it's certainly true that the current levels of inflation that we're seeing, that it's a 4-decade high. And of course, 4 decades ago, the world was a different one that we're seeing today, with the world being much more globalized today, shocks in China impacting the global economy and the other way around. So I think to some degree, one has to hope that the current tools are sufficient. But it is certainly going to be a gradual decline if we are to see a slowing in the CPI later this morning, your time. Then I guess it will be a gradual decline that we will see going forward, given that there's still all these factors at play, which don't necessarily indicate that there would be a quick decline in inflation, but rather sort of a slow and gradual move towards lower levels that the Fed is targeting. The Fed is expecting 4% this year, which of course at the moment we're nearly at double that rate, and we were at that in April. And we're seeing companies still continuing to pass on high inflation to consumers and to customers. We're seeing consumers at the moment, at least, still taking these price increases on, but there are of course questions also, where's that point where consumers will reduce purchases and will stop buying things. We've already seen it with some companies in the US with big ticket purchases, for example, for mattresses, for fridges, for sort of those kind of appliances and things that people bought during the pandemic, that the sales of those have already declined in recent months. So I think it remains to be seen how far companies can continue to pass these inflationary pressures that they're seeing on to consumers and to customers, and where then it will actually start to impact sentiment and also then economic growth, which we already saw was not as expected in the first quarter.
Absolutely not. OK, Nina Trentman from the Wall Street Journal. Appreciate your analysis. Thanks so much for being with us.